Hey, this is Chaplain Tony Repic here. Just want to remind you that this podcast does not imply any endorsement of any commercial organization, product, or belief system. Well, hey everybody, welcome back again to the Balance Podcast. This is Chaplain Tony Repic out of Biddle Air National Guard Base in the 111th Attack Wing, delivering some good content to you that's faced or surrounded around those four domains of comprehensive airman fitness, our mental, social, spiritual, physical health. I'm excited about the gentleman I have sitting across from me today. I know you can't see him, but you're going to hear his voice. You'll see a picture of him there if you're looking at this on YouTube. The gentleman from the 193rd, Master Sgt. Shawn Jacobs, and we're going to get a little opportunity to know him a little better today. And just as a segue into this, we're going to be talking about mental health, resiliency, and what Shawn says, leadership with a big L. So more to come on that. So again, I hope you really enjoy this podcast. You'll take something from this. But Master Sgt. Shawn Jacobs is with us. And Shawn, so, hey, man, thanks so much for being here today, for driving out here from Harrisburg State College all the way out to Philadelphia. So thank you for being here.
Hey, I could not be happier to be here today. I literally love this topic, and I love the idea that I can share it with you today. It's motivating. Get me up at 3 o'clock this morning to get over here so I can talk to you wonderful people.
Nice, man. That's great. So I guess just so the audience knows, obviously they know you're a Master Sergeant in the Air Force. That's about all they know. Give us a little bit of background, how long you've been in, maybe your career navigation, you have a family, just some things to get to know you a little better.
Absolutely. So my background, I am a Pennsylvanian by naturalization. I grew up here just outside of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Cumberland County.
Nice.
I left for the Air Force a little bit later than most people do, active duty in about 2008. I was 22 years old when I joined. I had just turned 22. And I spent 6 years active duty. My first duty station after intelligence school, that was my AFSC, is 1.0 in Operations Intel, also known as All Source Intel these days, was Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. And that was 4 years of an adventure. It was an amazing time, one of the best times of my life. Decided to have the inspiration to drive the whole way up there and drive the whole way back. So we took the Alcan, about a 7,000-mile journey, myself and my ex-wife. From 2009 to about 2013, I was stationed up there, and I loved it. I worked for the 611th AOC, watching the Russian Bear for a living. And then I PCS'd to Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida, around 2013 and 2014. And right before I got hit by a hurricane, so I wasn't there for that. And it was around that time my life started to change. And I went from what I was very comfortable with in my Air Force career as a senior airman. At this point, myself, my wife, we went down there and kind of started to grow apart. And since then, which we'll get into later, that was a rough patch in my life and that I'm here to talk about today. But since then, I've moved back to Pennsylvania. Around 2015, I joined the wonderful members of the Pennsylvania Air National Guard and the 193rd Special Operations Wing, and specifically the 193rd Air Operations Group in State College, right next to Penn State. And we're an AOC integration unit, and I've spent the last almost 8 years there. I was a DSG for a little while and went to Shippensburg University, but then after a deployment out to Al-Udeid, I decided to take a full-time job up there as the NCOIC of Intel Training, and I've been there since about 2017 full-time, and I've been remarried. I have two wonderful children, 11-year-old daughter named Emma, and a 3-year-old son named Kieran.
Nice.
My wife's name is Ashley. We actually dated in high school and got back together when I came back to Pennsylvania.
That's cool.
And I just love it up there. I love interacting in the state of Pennsylvania, and to be honest, I've done a lot more traveling as a Guards member than I ever did as an active duty member. Yes. We have, just this year, I've been 3.5 months in Europe, supporting our state partnership as well as our AOC over there, dealing with the command and control of supporting our NATO partners when it comes to what's going on in Ukraine and other interests that we have in Eastern Europe. And it has been absolute blessing, and at the same time, it's also been the biggest opportunity of my life is to serve others. And just finding new ways to do that is what excites me.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, and what's a unique experience that you bring is, you were active duty, came over to the Guard. The Guard to me is this hidden gem that people don't realize. It is the best of the best. Just my opinion. I've been in the Guard my whole life. Army and Air in Pennsylvania. But the opportunities are unbelievable. They're numerous, and I got to travel the world too. I've been in 8 different countries, so it's kind of cool.
Amazing.
There's some active duty folks who don't get a chance to do that. So, Shawn, thanks for sharing a little bit just about your background. Again, it's you're a senior NCO here, serving your country, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so, you were starting to share with me, and I'm glad I stopped you initially because I don't know your story. And this is what's awesome about being able to connect with people and connect with airmen is I know you have a powerful story, and we want you to talk a little bit about that today. So, mental health, there's still a stigma. Let's just be real. There's still a stigma. I deal with it every day working with top secret clearance folks who are worried about, am I going to lose my clearance? Can I continue to serve? And we have to continue to work through and past this. And it takes guys like yourself that have the experience with some of these challenges and as a senior leader to get in front of airmen. So talk a little bit about mental health, what it means to you, and sort of your own journey with mental health.
So I'd like to start to caveat mental health, absolutely not a subject matter expert in any of the fields, whether it comes to how we do things in the DoD or the Air Force. What I am an expert is in life experience and my own experience.
It's more important in my opinion. Yeah.
Because working in the process only and providing that feedback improves the process. And the processes we have are better than they were 20 years ago. They're better than they were 10 years ago. They're better than they were 5 years ago 10 years ago when I was involved in this patch of my life. So a lot of evolution has happened. But in 2015, 2014 really, when I PCS'd at Tyndall Air Force Base, I was my ex-wife and I moved to Tyndall. Very much a different mental style. The base was converting from an AETC base to an ACC base, and it goes from being in a learning and training environment to being we have to accelerate and change way before that became the norm, because they had to stand up and bring over F-22s. So I was part of the 325th OSS, and I hit the ground running when it came to tactical. For 5 years of my career as an intel troop, was at the operational strategic level. I had never been in the fire hose that was the tactical level of supporting a platform. So I had to go to F-22, intelligence training, IF-2. There's also co-located at Tyndall back then. These days, I believe it's at Eglin since the hurricane, or Langley. I can't remember which at this point. But any intel troop that's been through that school, it is a fire hose. You actually go to the same classes as the F-22 pilots. You get read into the same systems. You get a dose of what that's like to be a pilot because you have to understand what they're going through, what they hear, what's going on, the beeps and squeaks in the cockpit. So that's one culture shock. Second culture shock is that my wife, the school that she was going to in Alaska, Anchorage, she was going for biology. They didn't offer that locally in Panama City, Florida. So Pensacola was the closest location for Florida State, or a satellite version of that offered that. So we ended up setting up a separate place to live so she could go to school and pursue what she was interested in. That is what I was all about, was making sure that she was happy and that she could pursue her goals. And
no kids at this time, right? No children. Okay, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is a very important detail.
Yeah, right.
So stretch and thin. I'm a senior airman at the time. Senior airman 2014. This was during the belt tightening, the force restructuring of the Air Force and active duty component. They were paying people to get out. Captains were getting shown the door and getting paid a severance. There was, for my career field at that time too, I thought I was pretty safe because I was looking at a re-enlistment bonus that was pretty high those days. It was in the multiplier. I think it was like 6 points. It was something like in the neighborhood, if I re-enlisted, about $80,000.
Oh, wow.
I think it was. So I didn't think I was going to have too much problem for a while, but I was stretching myself thin. I had a big PCS and I had some money in the bank, but I'm still a senior airman on a single family income trying to pay for my wife's college, making good use of things like the Hap Arnold grant and other things afforded to us as military members, but still burning the candle at two ends when it comes financially. So that's what the third strike against me. And then the fourth strike was the culture of within the unit. The unit wasn't bad. It was the fact that there was a lot expected of me that I was not familiar with and trying to cope with a lot of different things while trying to thrive in a new environment. It was a good, perfect storm of what I could probably equate to being the norm of anybody PCSing to a new base when you're still fresh. You're in your first enlistment.
Yeah.
So that is kind of the setting the stage for what happened. Very rapidly, after about 4 months of being at Tyndall Air Force Base, my marriage starts to break down. The taxingness of going back and forth. It's about a 2-hour drive back and forth. So 2 hours there, 2 hours back to Pensacola to see my wife during the week while I'm already working 13, 14 hours and do not feel the motivation to try to get out there. And then when I am out there, it's only a few hours of really good quality time. So things start to break down.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my wife and I, pretty one-sided, decided that divorce was going to be the option. And that she also had found somebody else. And it was pretty quick, all at once.
Yeah.
A lot of things.
Were you doing shift work at this time too?
No, we weren't.
No, okay.
Fortunately, I was not a shift worker. We weren't operational. Right. Like I said, we were still standing up and I was in a training status too.
Yeah.
I mean, I had my 5 level and I was a fully fledged senior airman intel analyst, but I was producing at least 4 or 5 products a week for what we used to call the Wing King briefing. I don't know if this base still does that too, where you
we refer to that every now and again. Yeah.
Old school term, if bring it back. The Wing King briefing, and then you'd also have a TSSCI briefing once a month, and you'd also have special access program stuff because we were in the 5th gen community. And I know a lot of us like to have that daily news in our bathrooms too, in a lot of our operational facilities. And as a senior airman, it was my job every day to come in at 5 a.m. and make a new product so the pilots could read what's going on in the day. It was considered also part of that duty. So there were a lot of do-outs, but no shift work. But it felt like shift work.
I was just curious because that would add even another potential element just to, the overall stress and complexities. But go ahead, carry on. Sorry about that. I was just curious.
No, not at all. So all of those things that came together to make a perfect storm. My ex-wife expressed her discontent and her interest in parting ways, and I didn't take it very well. I didn't lash out at her, but in the grand scheme of things, it felt very one-sided at the time. And I went into a deep depression that I do know was major depression after being clinically diagnosed after the fact, which was temporary, luckily. And a span of a couple of weeks went by. You have to forgive me because this was 10 years ago. I don't know how much time went by. But we weren't divorced yet. And we were living in 2 different places, and we were still coming to terms with what we were going to do. And I was starting to break down. I was starting to feel what I would equate to like a robot. I did not find joy in almost anything. It wasn't so much that I was sad all the time. It wasn't so much that I was focusing on the negative. Is that I completely withdrew from life. And I was still doing everything that I operationally was required to me as an airman and at my duty station. And I was dealing with those stressors. And I was still working the way I should. And it wasn't necessarily impacting my work. But cracks in the mold were happening.
Did you recognize this in yourself? Or did others around you recognize it? Or is it you're able now to armchair quarterback and look back at this at the time?
I'd say a little bit of both. The one instance which kind of stands out in my mind before the actual, let's say, turning point of all this, in the actual climax to this story, not climax, excuse me, we'll go with climax. Climax works. Was I was giving a briefing just to intel members, my whole squadron, kind of like dry running a product that we were going to give to the wing commander. And a lieutenant in the front row was prior enlisted lieutenant, so he was a little bit older than just standard butter bar. And he started asking some questions. And in my memory, I still think he was wrong. But I lashed out a lot more than I should have in that instance. I reacted in a way that was disrespectful. And I mean, my squadron commander's right there in front of me. Everybody in my chain of command's in front of me. So much so that they had to kind of quell the situation. Not so much that there was like a come to blows or any sort of back and forth exchange. It was uncalled for reaction.
Yeah, yeah. And unusual. That's not who you were. It's not what you've done up to this point, right?
Well, as far as they knew, I mean, I'd only been around for a little while, too.
Yeah.
So I'd only been put under, I was still in, let's say, pre-IQT or initial qualification training for the F-22 unit and only been there a couple of months. I was doing the normal things that an OSS Intel all-source analyst had to do, but I also wasn't in with the F-22 squadrons and doing the work that goes along with supporting the platform. So I was kind of in that middle area.
Yeah.
So I can't remember exactly what happened, but some time went by and I did start school, which was co-located in the same unit for the F-22 Intel unit. And I made it through almost, I'd say 90% of the course.
Okay.
And the course only gets more and more stressful. And it is literally absorbing fire hose briefings all the time, going and understanding big technical data and trying to absorb all that and then regurgitate it all within a timely manner that is useful. And it is learning things that I never thought I'd ever know. And it's exciting stuff. But all at the same time, I'm going home and I'm sitting down on my couch, and the only thing keeping me from getting back up off that couch from going to work is to walk my dog, is to grab groceries, finding no pleasure in anything that I was doing. Losing weight, too. I didn't realize this till much later. I had lost about 20 pounds over the span of probably 3 or 4 months. I didn't recognize it. But where the story takes a turn was... It was probably maybe a week or two out from when IF2 or Intel training was going to be concluded for initial qualification. And this is where you get into like the harder parts of it, where you're going to actually be tested and certified and give a bunch of briefs all at once. You have a couple hours to put all the data together and have access to systems and then present that to the subject matter experts or a patch. And that morning I came in to work on something. I don't know what it was. And my supervisor had come by, a tech sergeant... I'm going to just keep it to last names, Woodell. Tech Sergeant Woodell came by, and he recognized, and he knew what was going on with me. It's not that they didn't know that I was having family issues and that I was working through them, but I don't know what he saw, but he had the mental cognition to recognize and the intestinal fortitude to ask the hard question. And the question verbatim to me, to this day I remember, it's like 6 a.m. and nobody else is in the office, is, have you been thinking about hurting yourself? And I got to a place where I couldn't speak. I couldn't say no, I couldn't say yes. I got choked up, I got teary, and I just stared at him. And it took him about 5 seconds to say, all right, put everything down, we're going for a walk. And I don't know how the sequence of events went there. It went... I know Tech Sergeant Woodell, myself, my superintendent, a Master Sergeant, that was literally a stone's throw away, drove me to mental health. And I talked to mental health. And basically stayed with me, escorted me, talked to me, made it not feel like something was wrong.
Yeah, that's great.
Tried to keep things normal. Yeah. At least to a certain expect. Not trying to focus on what we're doing, but to get me to where the next step was. Yeah. And then I got basically assessed by mental health and through 2 different doctors, and I started kind of some mediated care through them. But after a couple of weeks, I had a relapse, and to a point where they had to take me to mental health again. Okay. And they decided to outpatient commit me to a civilian facility that was outside. So by outpatient, just so everybody knows, what my definition of outpatient was, they felt safe enough that I was literally 2 blocks away, because I lived not too far away from the facility, that I was allowed to leave. Okay. Yep. They gave me medication. They saw me, they assessed me, and from that point on, they're like, you're coming here every day for 6 hours.
Oh, is that what it was? 6 hours a day?
Basically half of my day. Okay. Yeah. So, until further notice. Yeah. I don't remember if it was on the weekends or not, but I'm pretty darn sure. They assessed me, they gave me medication, and they made the determination after me being there for about 5 or 6 hours that they did not feel that I needed to be involuntarily committed. And I did not necessarily want to stay there. I absolutely wanted help. and had completely accepted it by then, that this was my life, this is what was happening, and I did not feel a stigma. I was scared for my career. I got, especially as an intel person, thinking that I'm going to lose my clearance and I'm not going to be able to work. But I did everything I was told, and I put it in kind of the, let's say, AA cliche of putting my life into a higher power. I'm not a religious person by nature, but I do have the virtues and believe in a higher power, whether it be by morals, or whether it is somebody else that is looking out for your own good. I believe that is a spiritual way of doing things. So I kind of put faith in the system and my NCOs that were around me. And my NCOs, to their credit, I remember specifically, would come visit me every day at home because...
That's awesome. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
So
you saw good leadership then. It sounds like right from the beginning, they took care of you. There was never a situation where you felt like they just cast you aside, got you where you needed to go, and kind of left you to hang out to dry there.
And it wasn't even just good leadership at one level; it was multiple levels. The OSS commander, and by way, I only know this because I had outbriefs with him before, enabled my SIO, or Senior Intelligence Officer, who was a major, the leeway and the because mental health actually recommended to my leadership to pull my clearance temporarily, to do something like that, which is not, I would never see that as a bad thing. That is trying to protect national security.
Sure,
at this point.
sure.
An unstable element in a system that needs protected would never, ever look at that as a bad thing. But my chain of command said no.
Really?
He is usable. He is not far gone. We trust that he can still do certain things. And they would have me come in for about 4 hours a day in the beginning of the day to do... They removed me from that intel training environment because it was a stressful part of that course. And gave me things to do. And didn't limit my access. Didn't put a mark on my record. Because they didn't want a mark on my record.
Right.
They wanted to see how this played out. I, to this day, have no idea why.
So they didn't consult you about this? They just made this decision without really gaining any of your feedback at all?
I have no recollection of being discussed with anybody.
Wow.
Because I assumed that was what was going to happen.
Yeah.
That I was going to be temporarily put into some sort of holding pattern where I wasn't allowed to do my job because of the access that I would be afforded based on need to know and necessity. And none of that happened.
Yeah.
Right away, the first thing that part of my chain of command, and by the way, those are words coming from the NCOs that were told to them by the officers. It wasn't like that they came to me and discussed that with me that I can recall, but I know it was their top cover from the officers appointed above me that ensured that no stigma was put on me from the beginning.
That's amazing, man. Sounds like there's a lot of collaboration, trust amongst leadership, which is phenomenal. And they obviously saw something in you that still gave them confidence that even though you were going through this difficult time, that you, again, were still usable, if you will, right, in the moment that you were in. So to me, this is a huge... I actually wrote something down. I mean, I just put down, this is an absolute mental health success story. And, you know, if you're just tuning in right now or you fast-forwarded, you got to understand what Shawn has gone through. He's sitting across from me right now. He's a Master Sergeant in the Air Force right now. This did not end your career. This didn't hurt your career whatsoever. It seems like, to me, this is why this is a success story. And I think what you're sharing right now is the impact on people that are going to listen to this one day. And I'm going to recommend every leader on this base listen to this. Every single commander, SEL, and first sergeant at a minimum listen to your story, because this is what we need to be able to absorb and then breathe into our airmen. But I just wanted to point that out. I wrote that down. I mean, we might even call this podcast, Shawn Jacobs' mental health success story, because this is phenomenal. I don't mean to cut you off. I had to inject there.
And there's so many more people in this other than just the leadership, because the leadership of the NCOs as well, from the flip side, from the ability to recognize these things, because it wasn't just Tech Sergeant Woodell. There was also a Tech Sergeant Peterson, who was my direct supervisor. It was like Woodell was his supervisor. And, Speaking of which, Waddell was a new Master Sergeant at the time. Peterson was a new Tech Sergeant at the time.
Okay.
I have since run into Peterson. I deployed with him in 2017, so I did get to see him again in my career when we were both peers. But they came to visit me. Maybe not every day, but enough that I can remember them coming and sitting down with me for an hour, watching me and talk to me about video games or talk to me about whatever I'm doing, trying to normalize things. Waddell had me out to his house multiple times.
That's awesome.
I drove maybe like 20 minutes away from where I lived in town to the out of town where he had his own house. I'd bring my dog there. He had a little pond. He'd let my dog, run. He wanted me there outside of work. He made it his personal responsibility to try to bring me back into the fold and to see where I was coming from. And again, I re-emphasize, this is a chain of command that did not know me for a long time. It's not like I had established a good relationship with this chain of command necessarily. I'd been there less than a year. I'd also been TDY to McGuire Air Force Base, somewhere in between there, for intel support to force protection, which doesn't exist anymore. But it was, but that was an awesome trip. So I got to come home in the middle of that one time I went to mental health, and then the next time I went to mental health. They let me go to a training because they knew that I could drive home and go back to my resiliency base, my family members, because I had nobody in Florida. I had no structure in Florida. So my chain of command became my family for a very short amount of time. They made sure that I had somebody to talk to. And it isn't even just those two guys. There were two other NCOs. I think he's a senior now in active duty, if not a chief by now, Claire. And then another guy, his name is escaping me. And then a captain who has since retired that was just the most bubbly guy. He actually went to the Merchant Marine Academy. And but his best friend was an undersecretary of the Air Force, so he ended up going into the Air Force. But he also had a very, very made a big impression on me. So the whole unit, in the grand scheme of things, I think I've mentioned, it's not a very big unit. It's like 50% of the people, because it was a very small OSS. So only maybe 15 people. Made cognizant decisions and saw something in me and made sure that what I was going through and the ideation, the depression that I was having, regardless if it was suicide related or suicide motivated, or had something to do with, we think something's going to happen to Jacobs if we don't do this. That wasn't the case. It was genuine, organic leadership. It was an ability to understand that there are warning signs, the ability to ask the question, and then make it their responsibility to escort, to care for, and engage with somebody. And literally, I don't want to also discount what the civilians did to help me, because I did go to those. It was more just a quick thing on the outpatient commitment. It was kind of like group therapy. Essentially, 99% of the people in that room were military related. Some of them were Vietnam vets. A lot of them were dependents who had things that were a lot more debilitating than what I had. And I can tell you, it is very sobering to go to something like that in a safe environment where all of their cards are set out before each other, and it's a judgment. It's a judgment-free zone, and just the horror that you can hear that some people experience or have experienced or are going through just to get through their daily lives sobers you up real quick. And it doesn't. I'm not saying that's what turned me around, but I'm saying it's one of those things where you realize how good you have it, no matter how much you think you've lost.
And that's the power of those groups, is because when you go through something like you went through, right, you feel like you're the only one going through it. You feel like no one else will understand you. There's something wrong with you. I shouldn't be feeling this way. But realizing that there are others, to your point, that are even going through things that are even deeper and darker maybe than you are. So it gives you that hope in that process. That's why I'm glad you plugged that, because so many military people in general we're afraid to let our guard down. We're afraid to talk openly in groups sometimes because we just don't want to be judged. we're afraid for what people might think of us. But I think the opposite happens. I think there's a synergy that takes place, and we begin to have more empathy for each other. Mm-hmm. We begin to look at each other and say, wow, I didn't even know you were going through something like that. I didn't realize someone could even experience that, right? So that gives you personal perspective as well. So I'm really glad that you shared that. Obviously, knowing that where you are now, I'm not surprised that that your journey through this mental health challenge that you were confronted with, you know?
So that's where I got to, and I absolutely got to the point where I'm starting to be treated.
Yeah.
I'm letting things like the group therapy sink in. I will be completely honest, I didn't take the medication. I don't know why. To this day, I don't remember why. I think I took it the first time. I had some sort of... and I'm not a person that's adverse to medication. Mm-hmm. I'm not. But I'm not someone who likes to self-medicate for any reason. In the grand scheme of things, I don't know if it would have helped. I don't know what if it hurt. I still got to where I needed to be, so I see it as good medicine.
Yeah, sure.
Regardless of whether I took the thing that might have, helped me with a chemical imbalance or some sort of something that would help take the edge off. All I can tell you is after probably 4 weeks, I started to feel feelings again in the grand scheme of things. I stopped getting into my own head. And it's really hard to describe what that feels like. There's a couple times in my life that I'll not relapse, but can get a taste of what that feels like again. Namely, when I'm away from my family for a long TDY or a deployment is the deepest I've ever felt coming close back to what that depression tastes like. And just where they're completely irrational thoughts of doing harm to oneself, but they seem so simple and an answer to a problem that shouldn't be in anybody's reality. But that I do sometimes, and my wife is very cognizant of that, and I'll tell her, I'll be on FaceTime with my kids or FaceTime with her when I'm at a long TDY or if I'm deployed last for 2017. So it's been a while since I've had a 6 month being gone.
Yeah.
But she's very cognizant of that change in me. When I just I'm feeling that a little bit, and what she'll do is she knows that my kids make that disappear. All they have to do is she's like, hey, you want to talk to your dad? Say this, and that. She'll preempt that. And that little dose just brings me back out of the cloud.
That's awesome.
That is.
Yeah.
So it's not something that ever went away either. But the treatment and the ability to also know that my career wasn't going to be impacted.
Right.
What is my future going to be? All of those things together had a rapid turnaround for me. I can tell you in the span of 2 months, I went from where I was to, I actually did get the divorce. It was about November 2014, if my memory serves. But I had a future to look forward to, because that's another thing you don't think about, is a lot of suicide victims or a lot of people that go into major depression can't see a future. Regardless of all those signposting and all the signs that are going on, actually feeling this kind of everybody's different, but the two things that stood out for me was how I could not enjoy anything and the ability to not see a clear path in front of me, not to plan for the future. That seemed impossible, that there was always something in the way, and it wasn't even rational things that were in the way, that there was no point to plan for the future. So those things started turning around.
Is this, you mentioned spirituality at the beginning of this, is this where spirituality started to help you, or what tools, what other things were you doing individually? I mean, you had a strong network around you regarding, you mentioned your family in the Air Force, which was huge. What did you start doing individually? Because it seems to me you worked through this in a very short period of time.
Very much so, yes.
So I'm just curious, what can you share with us?
This kind of foreshadows what I'm going to talk about and hope to at least talk about a little bit during this podcast, and is those pillars of resilience. I can tell you, looking back from an educated analysis of what happened in my life, that I almost was deficient in every single one of those.
Wow.
I was not somebody who liked to be physically fit. I did the minimum that I had to do to get past PT. I had multiple PT failures in Alaska, and it wasn't for a lack of trying. It was just shift work plus 9 months of winter, regardless of how much you go to the gym, and with a waist measurement, it was tough for me. So it wasn't something that I was, really good at. So my physical resiliency was not the best.
Okay.
I wasn't bad, but I wasn't the best.
Yeah.
I wasn't where I should be. I didn't, like I said, have a network around me. That network came into play. It made itself available. So I didn't have that.
Right.
I didn't have that pillar. I didn't have a spiritual pillar because I'm agnostic, an atheist to a certain point. But you talk about the spiritualism. Oddly enough, the spiritualism that I got at that time, that since I had the family and I started getting physically fit actually when I was there because I was worried about a PT test that was in December.
Yeah.
My daughter now, was about 2.5 years old. And I found something in her because we started our dialogue while I was going through this. It was a weird thing. I was getting divorced. I went back home for that Intel Support to Force Protection TDY, and I ran into her. And her and I just started talking as friends. And she had a 2-year-old daughter, and she was a single mother and things like that. And I just found the joy in talking to Emma became my spiritual guide. Was the joy for life and the discovery and the idea of something so pure, keeping myself alive to watch that unfurl.
Yeah.
That became my spiritual guiding light.
Sure.
Regardless of it was cognizant at the time or not, that's what I think it was.
Yeah. It gave you a meaning and purpose,
It
right?
did.
And I think that's what you're kind of conveying right there by looking at her and seeing, you wanted to see her grow. You wanted to be part of developing her, and just that gave you life that you didn't have before. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's amazing to how these 4 pillars, and again, you and I never had even a discussion prior to this podcast, how these 4 pillars are just, they're not just randomly thrown out there for the Air Force. And by the way, do you know all the other branches of services have these same 4 pillars?
Yes.
I came from the Army, so we have them as well. And I think too often we just kind of throw them out there as like fitness, do PT tests. That's way more than that. These are lifestyle pillars that we need to work into our being and who we are. Because when we do that, look, you're a perfect example of it. You just mentioned that you didn't have fitness, you didn't have the social, you didn't have the spiritual. You were going through the mental, right? But you're where you are today because now you have a plan around these 4 areas of your life, and you're not complicating it to be, oh my gosh, I got to do my mental resiliency today. No, you just you live life accordingly to these 4 areas, and it makes you the best you, so that you could be the best you for airmen that are below you, next to you, above you, so that you're able to actually reciprocate what your folks did on active duty for you when you were going through this hard time.
Absolutely. And I don't treat them as a religion in the sense that I think that they're different to everybody.
Yeah.
But I can identify where I was predispositioned for a disaster. Yeah. Based on not having these strong pillars. Would I have still gone through depression and still might have, encountered those ideations of suicide and thoughts of suicide to the point where I bought a rope and thought I was going to do it? It might have happened. Yeah. But I would have had something to bounce back. It would have been easier to recover. Yeah. And without those strong pillars, or at least 3 or 2 or any of them, you're going to crash. Yeah. Yeah. And it really, in the grand scheme of things, the ability to at least work on one of them or decide that those are yours, those are things that you can do for yourself to make yourself the better you. Yeah. Really is everything that I've done in the last 10 years, whether it was a cognizant choice or not, has really led in that path because of this experience. Because I don't want myself or anyone else to have to feel that depth of despair and basically have to touch the ideas to want to not be here anymore. Yeah. Because I would have not done the amazing things that I've gotten to do. I would have not been able to help the people, and I also would not have brought another person into this world. Yeah, yeah. Well, and for those of you that are listening, you're not going to see, or prior to where we are now in the state of the podcast, when Shawn was talking about how you were feeling back
and the time you were having your, the struggle, you got emotional. Obviously, it still has impacted you, and that's something that we need to keep using to move us forward, right? To keep us focused. And so you guys didn't see that, but it still obviously has impacted him. And I think there's something good about it. There's something good about communicating your story. Doing what you're doing right now is cathartic. I know it is. And it's not only for you, but how many people are listening to this that you're going to help today? I'll tell you that I was going to ask you to, and I'm still going to do this, but I was going to ask you to target young folks that might be struggling with trying to get a rhythm. But this doesn't apply to young. It applies to everybody. Mm-hmm. Your airman who is in student flight right now to the colonel, the general who's about to retire, could be somewhere missing one of these things or struggling with something. So I'll ask you, as a senior NCO who's lived through this experience and who's thriving right now and doing great work, what are some things as we kind of close here today that you would offer up, maybe in each of these 4 areas, that they could begin doing right now if they're just like in a rut and they're stuck? They don't know what to do next. Can you offer some resources?
Absolutely. So from an individual standpoint, not necessarily resources, because I'll get to that point, I think the easiest thing that I could say is set the goals for yourself that are related to these 4 pillars. Physically, for myself, this year, I was telling Master Sgt. Duke Elliott Harmon right before this when we were having breakfast. He was so good to take me out to breakfast before the podcast, so shout out to him.
Duke's the man. We love Duke.
I was telling him that all the great things that I was doing this year, and he's like, well, why are you doing all these things? And I said, I haven't told anybody this yet, but at the beginning of this year, I set individual goals, not just like your annual goal that you do on New Year's, and then we accomplish some of them, don't accomplish them.
Yeah, exactly.
I made a cognizant choice to pick goals related to resiliency to see if I could do them for myself.
Awesome. That's awesome.
So here in about 30 days, I'm going to be running the Marine Corps Marathon, and it's going to hurt, and I am nowhere near where I should be, but I'm going to get it done, and it's going to be 14-minute pace, but I can run a half marathon, but all the other things I did this year did kind of impact my training plan. So that was one thing. That's my physical goal.
There you go. Yeah.
That's a guy who didn't run more than a 5K 3 years ago.
Wow.
Trying to get, at 37 years old, to a Marine Corps marathon, just because to see if I can do it and hopefully inspire myself to stay alive longer physically. The second part of it was to find out what spiritually motivated me. And oddly enough, it's still the same thing it's been since Emma saved my life 10 years ago. And it's my family, and it's the people that I serve every day at the 193rd AOG, as well as the Pennsylvania Air National Guard. Those people are the reason I get up every day and do what I do, because they give me purpose. It's not because I feel like that I want to be better than anyone else, or that I want to rise to the top of of the hierarchy, and that is a cliche. It's the fact that the purpose in my life is to continue to do my job. Some people call that a workaholic. Some people will call that other things. But that's the spiritual thing that gets to me. And as long as I have those, I can think of when I'm running in the marathon, I'll think in the back of my head, I'll think my daughter, be like, if my daughter was in danger, I could do this for 5 more minutes. Exactly. I can do anything for 10 minutes, sort of thing. And then when it comes to the social and mental aspect, the mental part I'll get to last, because that's who I wanted to shout out at the end of this.
Yeah.
But the social aspect was trying to do a better job of being inclusionary when it comes to our unit. So this year I had the benefit, and this has nothing to do with me. This was saying yes, the power of yes, to all the opportunities to do stuff with our NATO partners, all the opportunities to do stuff with our Penn State partners, with our Army National Guard partners, and trying to help build better relationships and trying to add utility, because I'm a totalitarian by heart, if anybody out there doesn't have to Google that word, but I believe in utility. I believe in things that you can use to move your way forward. It's a good thing to have a vision, it's a good thing to have an objective, but if you don't have the tools to get it done, and me as an NCO can't give you those tools, then what good am I? So my social connection, creating paths for everyone to do what we're here to do, and that is to defend this nation and defend the Commonwealth. So that is my social aspect. It's more social as in organization to organization and personable than it is the, let's say, social culture.
Yeah, sure.
But it is social. And then the last one is the mental. And this is something that bleeds from this year, and this is more kind of a thing, and I have a patch on my arm. If anyone has been to the Resiliency website or knows about holistic airman or comprehensive airman fitness, hopefully has seen the Fortify the Force initiative that has been endorsed by the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, as well as our General Brown on our way out in the last 2 years. And it was Fortify the Force is really an organic organization, not focused necessarily on doing what everyone else either is mandated to do or hopes to do within our military infrastructure, because there are so many great resources out there, and there are so many great people within the unit, whether it be a first sergeant, whether it be a chaplain, whether it be the DPH, whether it be our mental health professionals, or your NCO that makes the pivotal moment in my life to change my life. That's the one I wanted to focus on, is the NCO that was in my life that changed my life. And we've done a lot over the last 10 years to help open up the aperture to focus on mental health and provide all the opportunities and get rid of the stigma, and even add mandatory training that has mixed signals from a lot of people. This is organically looking at the people who are passionate about helping within the ranks and to propagate good mental health and resiliency through the pillars. These are people who have either experienced mental health problems or suicide ideations, or somebody who has a family member, someone within the ranks that wants to explore what they have and be that sounding board, to be the next Tech Sergeant Waddell, who saved somebody's life and may never know what kind of impact they made because we never saw him again. If I ever put on senior or chief, I can tell you who I'm going to try to find to go to my ceremony is going to be that NCO. And
share this podcast with him beforehand too, to whet his
Absolutely.
appetite. You know what I mean? To prep him for it. Seriously, yeah.
So the tool sets that you were asking me about, absolutely use your Military One Source. Absolutely open up your Air Force Connect app and hit the resiliency button, or get with your first sergeants, get with your DPHs, get with your chaplains about the plethora and myriad of different resiliency items, and get involved. You don't have to do this necessarily because your chain of command wants you to, or you feel like you're getting behind in something, because it's not necessarily about keeping yourself from being mentally unfit or keeping yourself or passing your PT test. It is about making sure that you have the ability to adapt to anything. Yes. More than anything in this Air Force, we are trying to adapt, overcome, accelerate, and change. And if you are not resilient, those things are never going to happen.
Yes.
They're never going to come to you because you're going to be doing too much and you're never going to be able to fall back on anything. So taking the time to take a walk and to clear your head, taking the time for 30 minutes to run when you don't want to run, taking the time to talk to somebody else to build better relationships, and then also paying that service forward. That's what I want to say Fortify the Force is going to do.
Yeah.
And in the grand scheme of things, my last goal for the year is to stop playing lip service and to actually do something and take action. So I'm trying, personally, I'm trying to put together the first Pennsylvania chapter of Fortify the Force.
Awesome.
So anybody
That's
absolutely
awesome.
that hears this podcast can reach out to me via email. It's not something that's organized yet. It's a brainchild. I went to AFA a couple of weeks ago and I talked to their leadership for 45 minutes and finally stopped thinking that this was just something I would love to do and it's something that I'm going to do.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Throw out there your email if you want to. Go ahead.
My email is SHAWN, so Shawn, spelled the right way. So Shawn.Jacobs.6@us.af.mil. Definitely in the global. If you know Duke Harmon here at the 111, he'll get you in touch with me. You know Major Repic. I'm sure somebody can get you my contact information because I know there's 5,000 people that follow their webpage. There's tens of thousands of people that have seen the Resiliency webpage.
Yeah.
And if they scroll down the whole way to the bottom, they'll see the Fortify the Force. Unfortunately, it's still, it's an organic organization. It is not something mandated by DOD, by the Department of the Air Force. It is something that is trying, regardless of being sponsored, to propagate itself in a heavy demand signal world. But I think it's simple enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that gets people involved, but doesn't necessarily ask so much of them.
Yeah, yeah.
It's more than incurring your normal suicide prevention training once a year, or thinking about mental health when it comes to your PME or other things. It's an ability for you to at least talk to somebody about a person, because it could be even just an open conversation. Be like, I have somebody in this situation. What can I do to help you? Because I don't know. I can talk to my first sergeant. I can talk to my chaplain. But you're an intel professional who has dealt with the idioms, or not idioms, but the misconceptions of what this can do to your clearance, your career
Absolutely.
as an operator, and just convince me that I need to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it may be that.
FortifyTheForce.org. Again, FortifyTheForce.org is the site. If you haven't been there, and that's what Shawn's referencing here, go ahead and take a look. And look, I love the fact too. You hit on these 4 pillars, and I think this is why it's important for us to be setting goals around them as we truly close up this podcast. And again, there's so much great information, transparency, leadership that you displayed just by sitting here and doing this. If you have any desire to get involved, reach out to Shawn. I threw his email out there. Look him up in Global, Shawn Jacobs, Master Sgt. Shawn Jacobs. And these 4 pillars, though, the difference between you having goals around them and working and doing something with them is when you hit the brick wall. Because, listen, you're listening to this podcast. Every one of us is going to hit a brick wall. It's going to happen. How high it is, how thick it is, how big, I can't tell you that. But we don't want to hit that brick wall and have zero ability to get through it. And this is why these 4 pillars give us some tools, so when we hit it, we know how and where and why to work through it. And I think that's the most important thing in this whole process.
Absolutely.
It's not that we will not face adversity. Guys, we will face adversity. This is to help us get through, overcome, pay it forward by helping other airmen out, other family members out, so that we can move forward and be the best selves that we can be, right? And so,
Absolutely.
Hey, Shawn, I really appreciate you coming down here, being transparent and sharing your story. And I'm looking forward to this podcast being released. We'll make sure that share it with the 193rd. We obviously do that here at the 111th. I want to get this to senior leaders here, maybe even at NGB. I know NGB has listened to the podcast as well. If this could help just one airman, man, you've done your job. And I really hope one day you get to connect with your tech sergeant there at some point, so you could thank him and thank those that literally saved your life.
Absolutely. And that, if I had to end on one thing, I would absolutely try to say that as an NCO, as an airman, as an individual and a human, we are all responsible for each other. And the impact that you make is more than you'll ever know. And like I said, I've never gotten to go back. I did thank that tech sergeant, and I did absolutely convey that to his chain of command on my out brief. That's what I said, is that I sat down with the squadron commander at the end and said, hey, how can you recognize this individual? Because what I didn't talk about was I got to come to the world's greatest Air National Guard here in Pennsylvania after that fact. They enabled me and saw that, hey, you're coming to the end of your enlistment. The National Guard is there. We're not going to try. We're going to love if you'd stay, but we want you to move on and grow and heal. We know your family's back there. We know that's what you want to do. And they enabled me also, that family, that support structure, that NCO Corps and that officer leadership enabled me to make the transition to the National Guard, where I didn't know I was going to be where I am now. But like thriving and thinking back on that and thinking of what a pivotal moment that you only have a few in your life, that is the one that was affected by only one other person.
Yeah. And use those moments in our lives that when we do run into difficulties, they are springboards for us. They are truly springboards to help us move forward in life. So, again, Shawn, hey, thanks so much for coming. Thank you for tuning in here to the Balance Podcast. Again, we try to deliver some content here that it can change your life, bottom line. That's what we're here to do. And again, I hope you tune in. You continue to tune in, and we'll more to follow on just other great content surrounding those 4 areas of comprehensive airman fitness. Again, this is Chaplain Tony Repic at 111th Attack Wing, Biddle Air National Guard Base, and we are out. Have a great day. Hey, this is Chaplain Tony Repic here. Just want to remind you that this podcast does not imply any endorsement of any commercial organization, product, or belief system.